He goes, the secret, the papyrus printed with the wisdom of the ancients was the 2-drink buzz. He goes, master this and you'll party with the best of them, not be ashamed of all the things you did. And arguably, then the most important is that you might not go home alone. But few can master this skill, for it is a skill of delicacy, a skill of the utmost self-control, a skill that lives on the knife edge of excitement and energy. A passing vapor has more substance than this skill. Why? Because to enjoy this level of nirvana, one must go to the precipice of enjoyment and stop, hold, and maintain the 2-drink buzz. He goes, and an existence that beckons one further, like the sirens calling the sailors to their demise on the rocky shore. Many have fallen in pursuit of that 2-drink buzz. This is Matthew Allen. You are the equivalent of the 2-drink buzz, the mad scientist working diligently in a poorly lit dungeon, long hair, goggles to shield your eyes from the arcing electricity dancing between the open electrodes, calling the impressionable, beckoning the faithful, further, deeper into the RC abyss. Matthew Allen, we are lucky to have you. Build on, buddy.
Dang.
I know, right?
Wish somebody would write a poem about me. See, the problem is I don't think you're maintaining that 2-drink buzz. I think you're at 5 or 6 at this point.
Yeah, but I'm still trucking, baby. I'm not in the corner. I may not be taking anybody home, but I'm having a good time. Anyway.
See, now I had different advice that... Welcome back to the Aviation RC Noob Podcast. I'm Joe.
And I'm Matt.
That was a little different. We're going to try doing a little different with our intro while we're not playing the same intro bit every time, and see how that goes. But we're back, episode 56.
Yep.
Matt, you actually, I think, recorded a solo session because, boy...
It was like a moment of like, well, I'm already halfway here. I might as well just let it keep going. And, you know, if something happens, I can release it. You've been really busy. So it would kind of fit with what's been going on anyway. So if I had to release it as a solo, it would happen. And then we could do the regular episode as, you know, the next one. But we keep on target.
Well, what had happened was...
I had a boss who said that every time I got on the phone. I'm just saying. Anyway, so what had happened, Joe?
So what had happened, we were going to sit down and record last week because we got a week ahead on our schedule, so we had some flexibility.
Yeah, we are so good at squandering that.
That's right. Instantly. Boom. Gone.
We just got busy doing something or other. Oh, I know what it was.
I wasn't going to call it out.
It was me. It was my call. I ended up mistaking what day we were doing it, and I had double booked with somebody who was important to me beyond you, Joe. And I said, oh, shoot. How do you feel about doing it next week? And you're like, fine.
Yeah, all right. And then just trying to coordinate. And then we were going to record last night, and I got home from work, and I was like, I'll take a nap before we record. No. And I proceeded to die in that bed.
I called you in the 10 minutes you were up.
Yeah.
Dude, Joe, what's going on? Are we recording this thing or what? And at that point, I think it was like 40 minutes into the record. Like, if I have to, you know, I'll go back and start it over. So, anyway.
Anyway.
That's okay.
But we managed to get together, and not that everybody knows about it, but Matt, your webcam's been having some serious problems.
Oh my God, what a pain.
So, a lot of you know this, we record remotely, and we use Discord so that we can see each other for the visual cues, and it just kind of helps our engagement with each other. And Matt has been able to see me, but I haven't been able to see you during a recording for months.
I don't know why you keep wanting it. I figured that was like a blessing for you. Look,
Well, no.
I don't have a face for, I have a face for radio. I don't have a face.
You have a face for radio. Yeah.
I mean, come on.
But again, the visual cue. So
Yeah.
we actually managed to play around a little bit and get your webcam working. So, hey.
Yeah. Hey,
I
Joe.
can see you again.
He's getting to see
And
all my weird facial tics. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just,
Shoot.
moving around, looking at different stuff, giving him the finger, which is like, your turn. Not
That's
that
right.
other kind of finger.
But also, your webcam should be functional for build parties again.
Fantastic. That's what I'm really excited about. Dude, I've been like, what is wrong with this thing? And I tried a bunch of different settings. Apparently not the ones we tried today.
That's right.
But we also did a reinstall, I think, of the camera hardware or the software, I think.
The drivers.
And things like that. Even though they said everything's up to date and all that stuff, sometimes just pulling it all out and kind of repacking it.
Yep.
Like, on a trip where you got a little hasty in the initial packing during the trip. You're like, maybe it's time to take it all out and just pack it right. So,
or as the trip goes on, things jumble around and get out of place. I mean, it's drivers. They're weird sometimes. But that was not I don't think that was a problem. Ultimately, it was some setting in Discord that we
It's kind of a default that makes it sound like, oh, it's going to work better. And the answer is, it doesn't work better on my end.
That's right. So speaking of build nights, let's get into a little bit of housekeeping, and then we can get into what we're doing, which I think we're talking F.A.A. stuff today.
We're talking F.A.A. stuff today because there was it's basically a follow-up to some of the bigger stories that have been coming through regarding our hobby, I think. So we had a follow-up to earlier, so I wanted to make sure we covered it.
Okay. Man, that episode was way back there when we were talking about that.
Well, it was December, and it was also like when we started. Whereas like the year, was it the year after we started? The F.A.A. dropped the bomb.
No, it was the year that we did start. Well, see, episode 17, which was January of 21.
Right. Okay, so that was like the year after.
Yeah, it was 2 episodes before our year end episode. So,
and it was like that when we started was when they kind of started announcing it, and then they had the whole year, and then they made their ruling the following January.
Right.
And episode 17, and then there was a lawsuit that was filed, and in December there was details on they actually had the hearing, and the congressional hearing. Was it congressional? No, it was the court of the appeals court. We'll get into the details of that.
Yeah, because you're kind of going over all your topic
material. No, I'm not. Trust me, I'm not. There's a lot more to it. But my point is I'm going through the quick timeline. And basically this past December when we had Tad Leeds on, we did briefly, if it's not that episode, it's the one just after it. We covered the topics that were in the trial. And, because they were keeping it very secret how they were going to approach and challenge the F.A.A.'s ruling, right? And the notice of proposed rulemaking and their process. And so that was the first time we were able to kind of see what they were attacking and how they were going to try and upend everything.
Now, you said when we had Tad's lead on?
Yeah, when we first made the announcement for the Hangar RC's build challenge. I believe that was in December. And it was,
right.
Yeah. And he'd come on and talk to us about that. And I think it was at the same time the F.A.A. stuff had come through. And so we chatted a little bit about both.
Right. That's right.
So in December, we kind of got a handle on that. And it was interesting. So if you want to go back and kind of refresh yourself as to kind of what happened during the trial, we'll cover some of that. But this is the results from that trial. The judges have made their judgment, and I won't reveal it, but we'll talk about it soon. And that's what this episode is about. It's to talk about what the ruling was and why and how it might impact us.
Okay. Well, getting into those housekeeping items, and then we'll continue on. I wanted to take a minute, as we do periodically, to thank our patrons.
Periodically? We do that every episode.
Not every episode, but we do it pretty often, and we should.
Yeah.
Thank you to our patrons.
Thank you.
Continue to support us monetarily for keeping the lights on. Again, all that goes through Matthew's credit card, so you're just keep helping him keep that credit card bill lower on that front.
I appreciate it.
And that's sort of where we're at now. So thank you. You know, and
good.
it's anything beyond that would come up is not just going to go to pay off Matt's debt. It's
no.
Even
if it did, we have a plan on once it goes past the paying for the basics of the bills, what we want to do with it. Past that. So it's never going to be just being stuffed in my pocket. That's not the goal. We want to make a better community.
And on that front, talking about patrons, Matt, you had the idea. I had the idea. It's weird sometimes. We just get talking and throwing things.
We do.
So it may have been yours. Probably, I'm going to credit you with it anyway. It turns out that we have, for every episode, we have show notes that are not what you guys see when we upload the episode. That's sort of just the highlight, here are some resources. Mm-hmm. But we have show notes that Matthew generally types up extensively sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Some of them are pretty involved, and some of them are like, it might as well be like chicken scratch.
Right. That, basically that's what we go through, top to bottom as we're going through and recording. It's our reference page as we go. And we've not deleted those out of the Google Drive for the entire time that we've been doing this. So we still have all those. And during conversations, we said, it'd be cool if we did something for our patron community. Mm-hmm. And it's a little weird to approach this one because Matthew and I always wanted this to be open and there was nothing behind a paywall.
Right. We want everybody to be able to access what we do.
Right. And so what we do is this and the build nights and and this is more the behind the scenes kind of thing. So, we're going to upload over some time because it takes a little bit. We're going to take all of our show notes that we operate out of for every episode and just put them up there as a patron benefit that patrons can go and see the documents that we've operated out of for each episode.
And I guess one of the benefits you'll see that you can't see is when we're doing a history, there's always going to be a picture or two of a plane. If I'm doing a specific build and I've been working at it for a little bit, Joe hasn't seen it, maybe I'll post a picture so that he can see what plane we're talking about when we're talking about what we're building. And Joe will sometimes do the same. And also, if you're looking at some of the early episodes where we talked about motors and ESCs and all that kind of stuff, we would have various diagrams so that while we're talking about it, we can keep our head focused in the right, spot of the conversation. And so you'll see those. So, and it could be a good companion as you roll through some of the episodes, if you haven't listened to them already.
Or just to be able to go back and see, I remember when they were talking about this. And, again, it's ultimately more of a behind the scenes, not a, additional content that is beyond what we do. It's just, here's what we've operated out of. And you get to see the notes we're reading through.
Yep. And just know that the images are not, they're probably and very likely copyright protected. They were for our use only, and they're for your reference only, and not to be passed around and used as some sort of, I don't know what. I just don't want to get in trouble with the copyright because that's not the goal of that. That was, it is and still is a private thing between us, Joe and I, and the patrons.
Yeah.
No.
And as of this moment, Matthew, you brought it up and, I kind of got started on it. All the way, show notes all the way up through episode 26 are now on the patron page.
Nice work, sir.
Yep. They are uploaded as PDF. It's the only really way I can figure out how to do it quickly. So they're individual posts on the patron page, or on the Patreon page, that if you're a patron, you should get to see them. And while I was in there messing around trying like patron tiers and such, because I didn't want it to be like, here's a minimum value. So, like you got to hit this. So basically it's checked as if you're a patron, you get to see this stuff. There's no minimum value. So yeah, just a little bit of a nice return for our patrons. So thank you. And, I hope you enjoy seeing that stuff. Some of it's kind of combobulated.
Well, you get to see the messy minds that put this all together. Anyway, so good. So definitely with the patrons now, look, if you can't support us monetarily, there are still other ways you can help us spread the word about the podcast. You can tell, I say, pick your favorite episodes and tell 2 or 3 of your friends who aren't listening to just try one of those episodes. Send them a link through a text. All of our, when you go to our website, there is a link button. You can link to Facebook, you can link to Twitter, you can link to an email, you can send a message, you can just copy it. Yeah. In the upper right corner of kind of like the Playing Now episode, you'll see those links in there. I use them, honestly. I use them to do some of the Facebook posts. It just makes it quick and easy. So
yeah.
Yep.
And then looks like you've got a build night scheduled. This will go out.
Yeah.
Actually, we're so late on this. This will go out on the 6th. No,
it's fine. No, it's actually, we're going to have, we are going to be releasing the next episode on the morning of the build night. So if you are studious, you download the thing and listen to our, not this episode, but the next episode right on time, you'll probably hear us say, hey, and we're going to do a build night that same day, later in the afternoon. So we're going to do it on Saturday, the 20th of August. And we're going to kind of set it so that we can have some of our European listeners, because usually we do it at night on Friday. That isn't the best for everybody. So we're going to switch it up to 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. It gives you the same 3-hour window to hang out and chat and visit and show up and say, hey, as we normally have. But it's going to be in the middle of the day. So if that way you're more awake, and we look forward to seeing you. Anybody who can make it, come on board. I'm going to make a post in our Discord and our Facebook. I'll probably post to a couple forums. There's a couple kind of hangout places in the FT forums that have expressed interest in kind of hanging out as part of the community. I'm happy to have them join us and talk about whatever we're talking about over there. Which is generally building foam airplanes and flying them. So it fits in pretty well.
And that 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. is Eastern time?
Yes, it's Eastern daylight
whatever time.
Is it now?
Daylight Standard, something or another.
I don't know.
Whatever it is we're in.
Yeah, America's so weird. All right. That being said, I think everybody knew that getting into it. One of the things I also wanted to mention is AirVenture Oshkosh just happened this past week. There's a number of our community members that live out that way, or at least went, full scale, either pilots, enthusiasts, or just curious, and they've heard about it for years, and everybody says you need to go, and they did this year. So if you went, I would love to hear about it. I want to hear, pictures. What was the most exciting part?
You want to hear pictures.
I want to hear with, when you write up what happened, why are you posting this picture? I want to hear what the story is that goes with the picture.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
You want to taste colors too?
Look, I've done it. Okay. So don't talk about that. Synesthesia is real, man. It's real. Okay. But basically, I want to know more about Oshkosh. I'm strongly considering, if I have enough vacation next year, to get out and check it out. And I would love to know kind of what I'm in for. As I understand it, it's quite fun, quite interesting. And it's I think it is straight out the biggest aviation celebration for private pilots and home-built people. And basically anything in the aviation industry pretty much shows up there if it's in the private sector. There's a ton of, it's incredible. There's usually like a ton of build workshops. So if you're looking to build an ultralight, so people come showing off their new products. So you have all the different companies. And that's the other thing I wanted to see is, who was there? What were they showing? Is there something that us in the RC industry should be pretty excited about? Like, what should we be paying attention to? As I understand, there was a small, the AMA had a section there, and Flight Test was there, and they had a section that had RC flying. And there were people who were full-scale pilots going, whoa, this is pretty cool. I want to try some of this.
There you go.
Yeah. So pretty interesting. Anyway, so I'd love to hear more about it. I think we're going to make maybe a post thread for it so that we can kind of put the information in one spot so we can all look at it on the Discord forum. Send us your emails and we'll talk about it on the air. And we'll share it. So anyway, if you could, I would love to do that. That would be a big help to me going forward. And I think it would be good for listeners who don't know much about AirVenture out in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, to know more about it. And then I think that brings us around to what we've been doing, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Why don't, well,
you want me to go first or you want to go first?
I'll go real quick because I'm short.
Oh, you're not short. You're perfectly tall. It's okay, Joe.
Okay. I'm 5'11". But what I've been doing, my list is going to be short.
Fair enough. Go ahead.
I'm still working on 3D printing the Model B.
Okay.
I've got the wings printed and the front of the fuselage. So I've still got the rest of the fuselage in empennage, vertical stab, horizontal print, and then all the little bits and bob pieces. But I had, I was printing like all the wing segments at one time. I had a lot of
you had them all like
stringing.
stacked up next to each other. So they're doing like one ring of like a layer of the wing, and then literally moving over to the next layer at the next section of the wing next to it, and then do that like 3 or 4 times, right? And then it would go back to that first one and do the second,
Yeah,
and,
so it's
stringing between all of those individual parts.
Kind of. It was stringing off like the back end of the parts where it came down to the knife edge for the trailing edge.
Okay.
Is where a lot of that stringing was occurring.
Is that where the path starts and ends?
I'd have to look at the slice to see what it was doing. Mm-hmm. I imagine that's at least where it was ending.
Sure.
Because that's where the stringing was occurring as it was going to the next one. And then actually one part, like...
It's easy to sand off.
Bumped or something. Because it like...
Yep.
1 or 2 parts were printing like in midair kind of thing.
Yeah, and you're like, oh, no. That's not what
I'm just
I wanted.
I'm going to let that finish printing, and I'll like just have to throw that away. But then the stringing was so bad. I was like, man, I'm going to have to like sand that and cut it and do some like work on it. And then I had to reprint the 2 pieces that didn't print at all. Well, they did print, but they were all jacked up. So I went in and as part of it, as part of the pulling out those 2 parts that I needed and putting them center of the print pad and redoing my G code, I updated the printing temperature. I pulled the printing temperature down a little bit and increased the retraction. I don't think there was actually any retraction recommended in the print profile from Eclipson.
Okay.
And so I added in some retraction just to kind of help.
Yep. Sometimes that can be a big help.
Yeah, it just kind of helps keep the filament from continuing to ooze.
Mm-hmm.
As
and
it's
then
moving.
there's also another feature where you can do a surface wipe, where basically it'll go back over like what you've put down, just at the same level, and it just literally wipes the nozzle,
smooths it,
and smooths out so that it that helps reduce the stringing sometimes. Again, not always. There are podcasts dedicated to all the details of this because it is very detailed. But boy, when you get it right and it's set up just so for the right filament, it's so beautiful to watch.
I'll be honest, I was very pleased with. Once I've made a couple minor tweaks, again, backing the temperature off a little bit and then giving it some retraction.
What temperature did you set it at? Like mid-range of what they recommend, or did you like a little bit
no,
hotter?
they actually had a set temperature. I think it was like 220, and so I backed it off to 210.
Okay. Yeah, I can't remember what the. No, you're using regular PLA or lightweight?
I'm using regular.
Okay. Yeah, the 220 is pretty hot. But I also know that when you're doing a single layer vase is typically what they call that. But basically, you're doing a single layer structure. They recommend you do much higher than you would normally, because normally it's like 205, 200 to 210, maybe somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
Find the happy spot in there. But when you're doing single layer, there's a lot of heat radiation. It cools down a lot quicker than if you have a 4-wall part.
Yeah, and that's what you mean when you say a single layer is a single thickness wall.
Yes, single thickness wall. That's a more accurate way to put that.
Right.
Good.
So it's printing better now. So I ended up reprinting all the wing parts because once I found that wasn't stringing at all, I said, okay,
nice.
Let me go and reprint them all, and they've turned out much better. I think there was still a little bit of string here and there that I'm not worried about. Like I can run my finger across it and pretty much break that off.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's not even consequential there.
And I'm having a hard time explaining it to the guys in Discord, but I've been really pleased with this Ender 3.
Mm-hmm.
The resolution's really nice. A feature, if you will, of the Eclipson that I was very impressed with, now that I got my settings right, there's actually wood grain in the print surface. So when you let the light catch it at an angle, when you see wood that's been like a solid wood that got cut and rounded, and you see the wood grain in it, you see that in the wings.
Yeah, I did see that in your print picture.
Yeah, when I took the picture and put it in Discord.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I couldn't really explain to them. They're just like, oh, that's, the layers you're seeing. I'm like, no, that is actually something they, like, somehow, because it's very, very subtle. It's very light. It's just ever so slight amount, but it's there. And I thought it was kind of cool. It's not going to continue to show through a paint job, I don't think, but, I thought it was kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it is pretty cool. I'm eager to see when the paint goes on. I'm assuming you're going to do at least a light dusting of paint.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because I don't have different color PLAs.
I mean, who does, really?
I eventually want to get, but now there's an interesting question. Briefly, because this is not what this episode's about. If I wanted to change my filament and filament color, how would I go about purging my nozzle?
Just push. You rotate so you can print a knob that you can put on the stepper motor.
Right.
You can advance the filament stepper motor.
Okay, you just push it out.
And you push it out. Really,
isn't it like fatter in there? Like there's a cavity that it melts and fills? Or is it only as wide as the filament all the way through?
It's only as wide as the filament all the way through, unless you have a small gap, and the small gap will cause problems and clogging later. So that's why when you're cutting the end of your Teflon tube, which leads into the hot end, I'm assuming you have a Bowden tube set up. It's not a direct drive.
A what now?
So some of the models have a direct drive where basically you put the filament into the top of the drive motor, and the knurling then pushes it directly into the hot end.
No. I've got where I feed it through.
Right. That's called a Bowden tube. And so basically the stepper motor is removed from the nozzle. And what that does is it reduces the mass on the printer head part, and it tends to print more accurately that way. That's part of why they moved the Bowden tube out. The problem is you have a little bit of lag between what it's trying to do and what it's printing.
Okay, I can see that.
So that's why in some of the things, they're like, no, we want a direct drive, because you're getting whatever the stepper motor is doing, it's directly pushing filament through or not. So there's arguments to be said for which one is better. I think it more depends on how rigid your table setup is, how rigid your frame is, and how tight your belt gearing system is for the travel arm, for the nozzle arm.
Okay.
And and the travel thread screws. I know in the ANET A8 they have, I think, I'm trying to remember if they only have a vertical Z thread on one side. They might actually have it on both, and that actually reduces the amount of error to a degree. Anyway, that gets in the nitty gritty. We can talk about that on the other podcast we're going to start. I'm just kidding. Help 3D printing idiots. Well, I'm the idiot. You're
don't try to assign me anything higher than that.
you're the model of success. Anyway, so
I'm the savant that came into the scene late.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so no, I'm just
okay,
kidding.
but the answer to that question then is, if I want to change my filament color, just pull my filament out and feed the new in and push it until it's the color.
And that's the other thing. It pushes
out all the old stuff.
Yeah, and honestly, I wouldn't even worry about it too much if you're going from one part to another, and that's when you make the change. Because when you do the skirt or the brim, there's enough filament in that part, unless it's like a really tiny part you're printing.
Right.
That surface volume that you have to print for the brim or the skirt is going to be enough to push the old filament out and getting the new filament printing. And by the time you actually get to the part printing, you're already in the new stuff.
Okay.
Now you can experiment with it.
Enough.
I usually do at least a little bit of pushing to make sure that it is flowing and it's doing what it should. And that usually takes care of most of the old filament anyway. So.
Well, I did, as a testament of I've been printing, I did get my X-axis, the crossbar, I got that tightened back up and mostly level. I think it's within an eighth of an inch from left to right. And so I let the bed leveling, address the rest of that, what slump I couldn't quite get out. So yeah, that crossbar's leveled, at least for now. I'm sure it'll slip at some point in the future again, and then I'll have to fight that. You just have
to keep your eye on it, is all. Mm-hmm. One of the things I've seen people do is you get those little levels, those little bubble levels, and you put one on the arm, and you can put one on the bed where like you never print anything. And then that way you can check to see if they're off.
Okay.
Just visually, it's a quick indicator like, oh, that's not where it normally is. Even if you just have one on the arm.
I mean, maybe one day if I do enough with it and I find it worthwhile enough, I may get the bed auto level set up for this.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm not going to get into it, but the first printer I had was supposed to have that going. And it was like an add-on afterwards, and I bought it, and I was like, this is going to be awesome. And I could never get that to work. So I'm a little miffed at that part. But anyway, I'm just glad I've had success since. So we'll get on. So what about the RV7, man? You were almost there with it.
And I'm still almost there with it. All
right. Sounds like you're working on my time scales on that.
Yeah.
Because the SR72 is almost done. Those motors are almost shored up still.
Meaning you hadn't cracked it open.
No, I haven't. I actually printed the things out. I cut them out. I got them kind of ready. And then I realized I had to do a little bit of not surgery, but I did have to disassemble some of it. And I was just not ready for it that day. So I worked on other things.
Well, what else were you up to?
Man, what am I not working on? Oh, so in the last couple weeks,
3.
Geez, I guess it's been 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think you and I spoke the day before yesterday for the first time in like 3 weeks.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't feel like it, but I think that's about
does.
Right. Yeah, but it has been. So what I've been doing, I'm trying to think. It's been a while. So when we got back from Flight Fest, we kind of put everything down. I did not rebuild the little flea biplane. I've got that sitting there. I haven't just sort of glued the wings back in and got the surfaces double checked so I could get it flying. So it still has not maidened, but I do have a plane that it was inspired by Jesse because we were doing the "What in the world this plane doesn't look like it should fly" game. We're passing pictures back and forth on some of the weirdest planes we've ever seen, and one of them was the PN Roland PN. He basically designed like high canard wing Delta flyers.
Okay.
So they look like almost like a Mustang Delta, but there's like some sort of forward flying surface in front of where the cockpit would be, whether it be part of the fuselage and it comes out, and it's usually like I set up like a canard where it's a couple degrees higher pitch angle than the main wing. And then of course there's, and we're literally like every variation you can think of. I'm pretty sure the 240 designation is that's how many variations he went through to get to that thing. And some of them are like, they're in line with each other. Some of them it's offset. And some of it is like this one, it's literally like, like the push pops where it's flat on the bottom, kind of triangular. And then on the top, it's circular. Like a freezy pop, not a freezy, right? Pop. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like the Italian ice pop things.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's what the fuselage looks like. And then on the side of one of the triangular pieces from the round side to the back is the triangular Delta wing, and then sitting on top of it is this kind of like a mini, almost like a mini Spitfire wing. Like it's smaller, much smaller, like half size. And it's just sort of perched on top like a biplane would have it. But it's the fuselage and the cockpit is set up like a GB, where it's like way in the back and there's like a little tail.
All right.
But it's a Delta flyer. So it's this weird looking kind of boat-ish freezy pop fuse with it's just weird. It's a weird looking plane. And the neat thing about, I think this is the one where I was like, I think I need to build this, is not only was I like, I don't even know that this will fly. I suspect it will. It is a flying ambulance. That was the purpose, the original design of it. So there are doors, underneath the cockpit where the pilot would get in. And then in front of that it would open up on either side, almost like a locker door. And inside was a stretcher. And so it would allow medical personnel to basically take somebody who's on a stretcher and kind of bring it in from either side and place them on the stretcher in the plane, close those, I'll call it locker doors up, but basically they're doors with like a couple little windows. They look like lockers because there's louvers on the one end.
Okay.
And then they'd go. And it just was, I don't know, pretty neat configuration and purpose. And I was like, how is that going to really affect the CG? I just needed to figure it out. So, and then I thought about, based on the size, I'm like, I could probably get a 10-inch motor or an 10 or 8-inch prop sized motor. And I could do this on 2 sheets of paper or 2 sheets of foam. And it'll go together real quick, because really you're just folding over and like pasting on a bottom for the fuse. And then the wings and the wings just kind of like stick into the sides. And you have the little like kind of dihedral, wing. And it's thin. So basically I'm like, well, I'll just use ironing to get the wing shape on that part. And let's do it. So I was like, all right. So I put it together and I cut it out one night. And then I just, in like 2 nights, I had it built. And about the rest of the week, it took me to kind of do some of the finer details with the way the doors were. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to put in the doors right away. Right. But I decided to do it. And then I put on colored packing tape and gave it kind of like a U.S. Coast Guard kind of stripe with the insignia on the underside, on the side of the fuse near the door. Because there's like a big area. That's where the Red Cross symbol originally would go.
Okay.
And so I went out and I tried to fly it the other day, and I've got a video that shows what happened. I'm going to leave it as a tease, but you can go onto my channel. I think I have a link down below. in the show notes. And then I give it a go. My first couple glide tests were pretty successful. The first attempt, I had to abort because there were things that weren't working right. So I brought it home and fixed those, at least so I thought. So I think you can tell by that the maiden flight was not without concerns. And I will have to say that it wasn't a complete failure, but it probably wasn't really, I wouldn't call it a complete success either. But it's a really cool plane. I thought it turned out pretty good. If you're in our Discord forums, you've probably seen a couple pictures here and there. And I'm looking forward to when I can fine tune it and fly around for, a couple batteries.
Nice.
And get our imaginary MASH unit out there. So I'm trying to think, and I've been working on like other, I'll call it side projects. There was a guy who put like it looked like a 13-inch or 15-inch prop size, like using pink foam. He made a flying shark, which I thought was really cool. And I'm like, well, I've got a couple APACs around here. Maybe I can make a small version and have a bunch of baby sharks.
Baby.
No, don't do it. Don't do it. It's funny. I made the post and I'm like, what do you call a shark that's like, a young shark version of it? And I'm like, and by the way, I'm sorry. There was a couple, I don't know what you're talking about. And the one guy's like, oh man, I can't get it out of my head. That's why I said I'm sorry. So anyway, we did some of that stuff. I'm working on a couple projects with our friend Sam Platt over at the Hangar RC. So we'll see how far those get along. But I'm trying to help him with some things, and he's interested in, I've been doing a number of designs. He saw one or two that he said, he wanted to see if we could take a look at. I also pulled out the Colibri Flyer, which was, it's a Delta wing with kind of a canard front, like a little wing set. And it has like a motor up front and this high little pod kind of scoop, like nose top, where there's like a pusher prop that sits in there for like a little 5-inch pusher prop. And it's a high alpha flyer. And I was like, I built it a long time ago and I couldn't get it to fly right. Probably because I was awful at flying at the time and I couldn't figure out CGs to save my life. Still really can't all the time. But I was like, let me look at that because it's been sitting there and it's really, I did it so that I thought if it flew well and gentle, it might be a good flyer for the kids to learn on. So I made it so it was very easy for orientation. Like one half was solid green on the one side and striped green on the other half. And then on the underside, it was striped orange and solid orange, depending on what side you're looking at. So,
okay,
just easy for orientation. It looks good. It's, if it was a gentle flyer, and I'm like, well, let me see. So I went through and I just double checked that everything was working. I lifted. I think the original problem was that the power pod or the props on it were low enough to actually hit the body of the plane and kind of cut a hole in the, I was like, oh, that's not good. I'm gonna hit a wire. It's gonna be bad. So I'm like, oh, I'll fix it. It won't take long. And then, like 3 years later, I said, let's actually fix that. So I did a little bit of surgery, added a little bit of height to the motor. It cleared the main body of the craft. So I'm like, okay. So I brought it out. And while the control surfaces were a little weird, and I think that had more to do with what was going on in the transmitter, I was able to get it up and fly and just, I gave it a couple circuits around the field and kind of felt how it flew. With refinement, it's going to be a lot of fun. I picture it kind of like a nutball almost.
Okay.
But it's touchy on the roll. And it's otherwise really easy to kind of float around. It with the battery in the belly of the long fuse underneath the Delta wing, it just wants to flip down, like it wants to be upright, like a ship that's got a heavy bottom, right? Like it just wants to float upright. So it does that, but it'll flip over pretty easily. And loops are very hard to come by. Is what I learned. Yeah, if you want to do like a regular loop-de-loop, it gets about almost there, like 80%, and then it just kind of flips back down. It says, no, I'm not doing that.
Now, is that a lack of power thing?
It may be that. I may also have probably a heavier battery than it needs.
Okay.
I mean, it might be a little bit heavy, but it flew really well. And honestly, the little bit that I did, because there was some success, the pan, I suspected the pan would fly very similarly, and it did. Maybe not as bottom heavy, but it flew very similarly. So, yeah. So I was working on those. It's sad to say the Dark Star hasn't really got anywhere, and I've kind of focused on doing some of the other side projects. And the Baby Shark. I know. And the Baby Shark project kind of like, ooh, look at that. So,
baby. No.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for stopping. Appreciate it. On behalf of all the listeners. All right. But that's pretty much what I've been up to. It's been keeping me busy. I certainly have plenty to do. I've only got a couple more weeks before the kids come back, and I'm relegated to nighttime building and occasional flying on the weekend.
Yeah.
So not that it'll slow me down, but still.
Well, briefly, because I know we're eating up a good bit of time. It may be possible that I would have some work from home days, in the future. If we can ever get caught up. So I think I kind of covered it. I'm working in IT now.
Yeah.
For a company. And so there's talk about once we get caught up, and kind of, because
once you can take off the fireman hat.
Yeah. And, put out embers and not full blown fires. That my coworker that's physically in the office, my coworker and I could like flip flop like 2 days a week each working from home.
Yeah. Putting out those embers from home. That's nice.
Right. And so if the embers are being put out from home and there's not chaos, then might have some at home time to kind of tinker with some stuff.
Oh, that's going to be exciting. I hope that's the case.
With work remaining the primary thing that's being done all day.
Yep.
Of course.
I fully understand that. There are times where I'm like, well, I'm doing a thing and it's doing its thing, and I'm going to kind of be over here monitoring the email. I might as well just cut a couple pieces out or put some things together.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm already getting a little downtime at the office finally. I've been working on a side program. I'm actually starting to program in Python again. No, I had a couple hours today.
Okay, nice.
But I actually pulled Python out. I'm working on writing a program that is going to be beneficial for us, hopefully. Not us here, but us at work. So.
Oh, no, don't worry. I'll be utilizing that. I've got ideas. I need your help.
You don't even know what I'm programming.
I don't know, but the fact that you can program something and what I want to have done is pretty simple. I'm pretty sure you can help me get to the end step. And also, it's ultimately something that I think will help listeners, and you can come to our website and do some of the things you would do while you're designing a plane. It's kind of the idea.
Cool. I'm $100 an hour.
You'll get a very terrible version because I'll have to do it in Excel and just hope it exports well.
Nah, we'll see what we can do.
You know the budget for this show.
No. You kind of talked about it, and I don't know
see
what I can do to interface with that, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm not too worried about it, really. But ultimately, Joe and I have been kind of rolling our eyeballs to maybe increasing the functionality for our listeners at the website level.
Yeah.
So, good. All right. So that, I guess, brings us down to the history episode, or the history section, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've already burned probably about 45 minutes at this point.
You'd be surprised at how fast this will go. We are going to talk today about the Junker 87, the Stuka. Stuka. So the Stuka is the Stuka is actually a short version of its proper name, the Sturmflugzeug, which is
what now?
It's the word dive bomber in German.
Okay.
And I have a note here, and I don't think I verified it, but basically it is literally the Germans' dive bomber from that they upgraded from World War II As battles heated up in the Spanish Civil War and the early sections of World War II, they had this dive bomber at the ready, and it turned out to be quite a terrifying force to be reckoned with, especially in the beginning of the war. But one of the things that I would have to say is distinctive about it, much like the Betty bomber from our previous episode, is that it is one of the few planes that lasted service from beginning to end of the war in an active role.
I'm looking at a picture of it, and I'm not used to seeing a square front horizontal stabilizer.
Yeah, it's an ugly. A lot of people are like, it's an ugly plane. I mean, it really is pretty crude looking, in the sense that like there's very little, I'll call it refinedness, finesse about the back end of that plane at all.
If it gets you from point A to point B,
and with success, yeah, and that's ultimately what we're going to talk about as we talk about the career of the Junker 87. So it was, let's see, the German dive bomber of the Luftwaffe, which is the name of the German Air Force, was at its prime in the early part of World War II, but it maintained its service and functionality throughout the entire war effort for Nazi Germany. From September 1st, 1939, it dropped the first bombs of the war, and on May 4th, 1945, it flew final Luftwaffe ground assault missions to defend Berlin. One of the things that they say are some distinctive features about this airplane is that it had fixed spatted undercarriage, which I was like, whoa, spatted, that sounds exciting. What is that? And it turns out it's wheel pants. It's the streamlined fairings that are covering over the landing gear, which we now call wheel pants, but at the time they called it spatted. And oftentimes they were either temporary and removed, or they didn't have them at all. But these, in fact, did have basically aerodynamic coverings over top of the landing gear, and the landing gear were fixed. So they
weren't retractable.
They were not retractable. So they'd be like that the whole time they're flying. Let's just say that, not that they were slow in the beginning, but that wasn't the concern. You know, they flew relatively high. They oftentimes had escorts, at least in the beginning. And once they started diving, it didn't matter. Once they started their dive bomb, having a spatted, undercarriage really didn't matter. So
I guess looking at it, the size of it is throwing me off in that it's a bomber. Like, I'm looking at it, it's like, this is more of a interceptor or fighter size.
Yeah, it's like a large fighter size, basically.
Yeah, it doesn't look huge.
No, it doesn't, but it's probably bigger than it looks. It was fitted with basically a pilot and a gunner. The gunner faced rearward. They were also the radio controller. They had basically a full clear canopy that went from the front to the back, as kind of like I don't know what you call it, like a lofted window, U-shaped window. I'm trying to think of because it wasn't like smooth like a Spitfire per se. It didn't have this molded glazing. It seemed to be kind of up, over, and down. That's square-ish in the midsections.
Yeah, it's more
squared off.
Yeah, there's a word I'm looking for.
That's okay.
Anyway.
Well, okay, so and this, like any plane that survives through the beginning to the end of any conflict, is going to have variants as you go. After the A model, which basically proved its usefulness in the Spanish Civil War, as I think the Nazi Germany had assisted in some of the Allied or rebel forces, I can't remember which. They learned a lot about the plane. They realized that the motor needed to be bigger because they had a choice. Did you bring the second airman or more bombs? You had to choose. They could not carry a full payload and the full accoutrement of crew. So they realized like maybe we should do something with the motor so that way you could do that. And so they made another a series of other variants, or variations or modifications from A to B. One of the biggest ones, and the one that it's going to be best known for, was the inclusion of basically a wooden propellered trumpet or horn that was incorporated in the spatted wheel coverings. And they called them the Jericho trumpets. And we're going to play a file for you about what it sounded like. And honestly, if you've listened to any air assault movie, that iconic dive bombing sound that you hear, those are the Jericho trumpets. And then the other thing that they changed from A to B was that they made a lot more, they sectioned up the plane a little bit so that you could replace parts that were damaged a lot easier. And they made access panels to get to certain parts so they could be maintained easier and quicker.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. It was one of those like, hey, you did all this thing, but could we do these things? Because this isn't really the best. We could make it better. So they did. The Model B held around for a pretty long while, first couple, 2-3 years. The pilots would, let's see. So, the Stukas were instrumental in the initial Blitzkrieg strike into Poland in the beginning of World War II. And so when you think about like what a dive bomb is, the way they would do this is the pilots they had a little sight at their feet, and they would look through the sight at the bottom of their feet there and sight their target. And then they had a small list, like a 10-point checklist that they had to go through, throttle back to the thing, set the flaps, you know what I mean? And they had to go through this quick checklist. Then they would roll inverted and pull into a 60 to 90 degree dive towards their target. What I found was pretty interesting is that on the side of the plane, they had markings on the window that should line up with where the horizon was, depending on what kind of dive they wanted to get into. It was like a visual gauge. So, which was pretty neat. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what like tickles my fancy there, but basically, so one of the things you have to understand is that like horizontal bombing is when you release a bomb and you're traveling, the bomb initially starts at your speed, then it catches friction, it slows down due to drag from the bomb, and then but it is also starting to descend and gain acceleration due to gravity, which is an exponential increase as it heads towards its target. So what you end up having is a semi-parabolic, and there's an official name that I don't remember, but basically it's a parabolic trajectory, which it's not exactly one. So it is really hard to do the math and get an accurate release of your bombs to hit the target you want with a standard just fly horizontal and release the bombs method, right? So one of the ways to make sure that you're very accurate with your bombs is you dive straight at your target, you release the bomb. Once it's released from your plane, you can, and it's no longer moored to it, then you can pull up out of the dive in like a heavy G maneuver to go level, if not climb back out, but the bombs would continue on the trajectory you had originally set with your plane. And they would often find that on a really bad bombing run, they would miss their target by about 100 feet, but usually they were within 15 feet or less of their targets every time, which is why they were so terrifying and so successful. So when they pulled out of the dives, they'd be pulling into like a 6G maneuver, which would cause the pilots to gray out, or they called it seeing stars. So basically they were losing the blood flow to their eyeballs, and they would stop. They would actually be pulling out of the dive blind. They wouldn't lose their consciousness, but they would definitely go blind for that little bit.
Yeah, because I don't imagine. Did they have G suits at this point?
No, I don't think so. I think that this was at the time where they were just starting to realize that could actually be an issue. Yeah, they didn't have G suits, and they probably weren't doing the hup maneuvers to be able to kind of maintain your blood flow back into your, up into your upper half of your body. Because usually what happens in a high G maneuver is all the blood pools down into your legs because it's not, the pump isn't strong enough to pump the blood beyond the G's. And so it all pulls down in your legs, and you don't have anything left for your brain or your eyeballs in this case.
Right.
And you start graying out, and then you start blacking out. And graying out is basically when you start losing vision, and blackout is when you go unconscious. And in a maneuver, and when you're pulling out of a maneuver that's aimed straight at the ground, you kind of want to be conscious for the whole time.
Yeah, one would think.
Yeah, otherwise it gets pretty bad. Anyway, so and then I'm always imagining, like, imagine what the gunner would be like. You're in the back of the plane, all of a sudden you roll over and you start basically looking at the sky. And then you get shoved down into your seat, and you're looking at the target as the bombs, strike or not strike the target. But you're also losing vision at that same time, and so they would be the ones who would confirm whether or not the airstrike was successful. So one of the things that the Ju-87s were good for is when there was minimal air support, as far as, so they weren't running into fighters. They would basically be able to bomb all the hard points and all the major armaments along that front unhindered. And they were so accurate that they would do devastating damage to the morale and the numbers of the troops on the opposing line in support of the invasion, whatever they were doing there. And we were talking about the variants. There's a lot of variants. So they had set these up. There was like a Ju-87R, which was a long range one, which is filled with, had drop tanks and extra cargo pods that it could attach instead of bombs. There was a model that was designed to basically have arrestor hooks so that it could land on the Zeppelin aircraft carrier that the German Air Force was building or designing.
The Zeppelin?
Uh-huh.
Like the airboat?
Yep. The lighter than airship. They basically had a platform on the top of it that planes would land on.
I was not aware of this.
Yeah. This thing's massive. I mean, Zeppelin was like the small version of what they were planning.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty awesome and pretty incredible. But as that project got scrapped, that never really got built, but they had plans for it, which I thought was pretty neat. They would put pontoons so they can land in water, and they would equip it with torpedoes so it could do a lot of sea maneuvers. And they were actually very successful at defeating large sections of fleets who were like, hey, those guys can't do nothing to us. And of course, they were very accurate. So they would devastate sections of the Royal Navy with some of the bombs. And there's accounts, and if you go to the wiki site and a couple of the other sites that we reference while I was researching this, I mean, there's battle after battle and like time after time where the Stukas were instrumental in defeating the main embattlements, like the battleships and the carriers and whatever that were out supporting the war effort, and these Stukas would come along and basically destroy them. They were very, very successful. They were very dangerous. And of course, then they talked about the Jericho trumpets. And those were that they were designed to basically put fear into the hearts of their enemy as they dove in. And if you heard those, you knew you may not make it out.
Yeah.
And it was terrifying.
It demoralizes you in the moment, so you're frozen with the fear.
Yeah.
So
the other
you
thing
fight back less, I guess.
Yeah, probably. I guess anything you could do to help your side in that war effort, I suppose. And now, of course, Germans are known for over-engineering, and they had actually like a little electromagnetic brake on the trumpet, so they didn't have to hear it the whole time because it was as annoying to the pilots as it was fearful for the for the ground troops who were about to get. And they would drop fragmentary bombs if they were fighting troops. They would have armor piercing rounds if they were fighting armored units or anti-aircraft. I mean, these things were outfitted for whatever mission they were set out. They would also be put skis in remote snowy regions. It's just incredible how versatile this craft was, and how, again, so it was really important in the beginning. It was actually very formidable. But as the forces started to build, fighter bombers and have more of an escort, and the speeds got faster and faster, where the bombers couldn't run away because they were just too slow compared to the fighters that their enemies had. The Stukas basically would at a certain point, they would basically go in pairs, and if they were encountered by a fighter unit, they would basically just turn and run before they got into contact. They just bug out, not even bother, because they just knew it was almost guaranteed death if they were to continue. So they were definitely outmatched at a certain point in the war, about halfway through, but they were still very effective as part of the overall fighting units. When put in the right place. Let's see. I'm just reading. Let's see, the Ju-87D. They would basically, as they upgraded these, they would add more armaments. And so this is near the end of the war. The D was basically very heavily armored, and it had a much larger engine, and they added extra guns in the wings. And this was so that they could focus on attacking armored ground targets. Tanks and whatnot. Even there was a variant that carried these like personnel pods. There were like a tandem seat pod that they would sit next to the fuselage on the wing. And then and I don't think they actually have any pictures of it being used. Like it's tough to find, but they're not the only craft and only force to have thought about this. But basically the idea would be put a bunch of people who are going to, go behind enemy lines, like a spy or something like that. And they would basically do a night mission and drop them. They'd release them, and the pod would drop down and be a parachute. And whoever it was would then be behind enemy lines. Yeah. Which just, I don't know, it's pretty crazy. So there's a ton of details on all the different skirmishes and all the different important roles that the Stuka played in World War II for the German Luftwaffe. So I urge you to go to any of the other history sites. The Wikipedia has a really extensive list of all the campaigns that it was involved with and their outcomes. We were turned on to by Kiax, one of our listeners. He turned us on to World of Warbird, another podcast that focuses on history of planes. And he was talking about how the Betty Bomber, and as I was looking at that list, I'm like, oh, the Junker. Yeah, we haven't covered that. I want to know more about that. So I listened to it, and it kind of got me interested to make this a history topic for us. He goes into more details about pilots, some of the individual pilots who flew, and he goes into the missions a little bit more because he's dedicated to that kind of stuff. So go out there and listen, learn a little bit more about the Junker 87. It's a really interesting, and it makes me want to build one and just go put a target out on my field and just go dive bomb stuff and practice it with like a little FPV in it.
Definitely need FPV for that.
Yeah, definitely. It'd be even better. You got to make sure that the trumpets are on it though. Anyway, all right, let's talk about the crew, like the how the plane was set up, the size and the weight and its capacities and all the stuff and its armaments. And then I think we'll move on to our main topic. How's that sound?
Sure.
Okay. It was crewed by two people. And I'm going to just use English units because I think in that, and I'm sorry. So roughly divide by 3 and you're pretty close if you're in the rest of the world. So it was 36 and a half feet long. Its wingspan was 45 and a quarter feet. As far as the wingspan, it was 13 feet high, roughly. It had a wing area of 343 square feet. It was the airfoil was the Göttingen 256, which I don't know how that designation works because I have not studied the German Air Force designations for wing design. But it had about a 6,000 pound empty weight. And when it was equipped, empty equipped weight. So when you added everything to it, it was really just an extra 100 pounds. 110 pounds. Max takeoff weight was 9,560 pounds. It was powered by the Junkers Jumo 288DA V12 inverted liquid-cooled piston engine. It had 890 kilowatts or 1,200 horsepower for takeoff, and it was 1,100 horsepower at 4,920 meters, so almost 5,000 feet. Sorry, not meters, feet. 4,920 feet. So it's almost 5,000 feet was its operating ceiling, I think, or at least its operating cruising altitude. It had a 3-bladed constant speed propeller. And let's see, it flew at like 211 miles an hour at sea level. And it was 238 at about 13,000 feet. Okay, so what is this? Oh, this is the rating of the engine at 5,000 feet. Sorry. So it has less horsepower as it gets higher in the air. So
it makes sense. You're getting less air.
Yeah, it's less dense. Yeah, less stuff.
But you can also go faster at higher altitudes with less, because there's less air drag.
Exactly. Yeah. So it basically traveled at 180 knots, and at cruising altitude at 13,400 feet, it would, or at its max ceiling. It doesn't really say if it is. No, its cruise speed was 113 knots at 15,000 feet. So it was just saying that it could cruise at 207 knots up near cruise speed. So it could go faster, but most of the time it just cruised at 113 knots, which is 130 miles an hour.
I think cruise speed tends to be like a fuel efficient.
Yes.
Speed.
It's like just. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say I was going to go back and correct something. So finish your thought.
No, go ahead. That was it. I mean, that was all I was getting at. We're going to cover range and stuff.
Correction. You said the power plant was the Junkers Jumo 288DA. Is actually the 211DA.
Oh gosh, my mistake. Yeah, you're right. Thank you. I'm glad you caught that.
It's late.
Yeah, I suppose it is. Okay, so let's see. Its range was 370 miles with basically 1,000 pounds of bombs, or it was 490 miles without any bomb load. Let's see. Its time to altitude to 1,000 meters or 3,000 feet was 2 minutes. It was 4 minutes and 18 seconds for another 1,000, and it was 12 minutes up to 12,000 feet. So for every 3,000 feet, it kind of took, 2 minutes?
Longer and longer.
Yeah, a little bit. It was armed with 2 guns, 2 MG-17 machine guns forward and 1 MG-15 machine gun in the rear. It could carry 1 550-pound bomb beneath the fuselage and 4 110-pound bombs under the wing. And that's what it was armed with. And
it's
they
a decent armament.
Very accurate bombs.
Yeah.
So very dangerous. So that is the Junker 87 Stuka. Now I've got a link to a couple builds. One of them's for balsa, and another one is actually the Nisgodas put together a Junker model.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, man, it looks actually really good. I don't know. So it's like a 50-inch foam model. It's a 13th Squadron, and we'll put a link to it there. And there's a 40-inch balsa model that from Outer Zone. You can go take a look at that and see if that's something you want to build. Definitely an interesting plane. It certainly had an important part of the war, and it certainly has a place in a lot of people's hearts. So I hope you enjoyed it.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Because I hadn't even been thinking about plane history lately. So
that's okay.
Thank you for putting that together, and it's an important one to cover.
Yeah, definitely. Well, if you want, I'm going to ask if you don't mind thinking about covering the next one. I could put together a list or some suggestions, but otherwise, you always seem to come up with some pretty interesting selections when it's your turn. So
I try to. I think I just spin the Google wheel and see what comes up.
Whee! Nice. Okay, so I guess we get on to the main topic. Main topic is a little bit ago, the ruling on the race day quads versus the F.A.A. Case had come out, and so let's just talk about what happened.
Well, can you give us a recap of what that case was initially about?
Okay.
So it's been a while. I've forgotten.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so on July 29th, it doesn't even say, I believe that was 2 years ago, well, a year, more than a year ago, Race Day Quads co-founder, CEO Tyler Brennan filed Race Day Quads versus F.A.A. to challenge the legality of the remote ID rule. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit handed the agency, the F.A.A. agency, a win. Unfortunately for us in the hobby, we'll talk about how unfortunate that is, and that's up to you to kind of determine after here. But it's important to understand that there's a context that goes behind this, and it's kind of important about what the courts did say, and almost as important what the courts did not say about what the ruling includes, right? Let's see. We're going to go through the kind of the brief. Let's see. So I'm trying to think of how can we summarize the rules in themselves? So basically it says that, we're going to make everybody who flies an unmanned aerial vehicle that's over 250 grams, they're going to require a digital license plate, right? It's going to have some sort of messenger element that's going to pass its location and some information about where its owner or where its pilot is, and basically send that information out for the public and or law enforcement to be able to access. And so you basically are broadcasting, it's a broadcast module of the remote ID. And it basically carries information about your drone and about your pilot location, like where did you take off and whatnot, and sends that out. And then they can use triangulation to be able to figure out with FAA and drone registration information to hone in on, I guess, bad actors or people who, I guess, need to be talked to about what they're doing. So the rule, published in January 2021, took more than 2 years to finalize. The public provided 53,000 plus wide-ranging comments. So they weren't just all like, hey, we don't like this one thing, right? It was like across the entire rule. The FAA published almost 500 pages of accompanying explanatory text. A surprise to many, the final rule deviated from the FAA's notice of public rulemaking in big ways. Arguably, the most significant was the change from a shift from a network-based remote ID focus to one that's a broadcast solution. This formed part of the basis for Race Day Quad's challenge. Race Day Quad said that the final rule was not a logical outgrowth from the original notice of proposed rulemaking. So basically, it's like they're not the same. Like you went and told us that you're going to do this one thing, and then you said, well, we're going to do this other thing because there were comments, and we're just going to do this other thing instead. It's not, you know what I mean?
So it's part of the complaint that changes of that magnitude to the plan should have restarted the process.
Yes.
Of going back to public comment.
In part, yeah. In part, or at least, that section needs to be readdressed. You know what I mean? As maybe the other parts can go as they are, but we need to start that process again for that section.
Okay. So what's it mean? So I guess how is the networked version of that going to work? And then how is this broadcast going to work?
And I think that was the thing. There was just sort of, if you read the language, it was like, these things are going to be there and it's going to be it's going to happen. Like there's going to be a network. Like, is there? I don't know. Have you been to rural America? There's not a whole lot out there. I mean, generally speaking, even cell towers, like cell coverage out in the Midwest is pretty spotty on a good day. picking up radio signals, other than, having like an aircraft tower, you can fly for a while and not really have anybody except another pilot or plane anywhere near you.
Right.
It's pretty remote. So, I mean, on the East Coast, it's a little different. There's a lot more higher population. There's a lot more density. There's a lot more cell towers and travel and things like that. So that's less of an issue. So they were kind of basically saying you would connect into this cell network or whatever this network was. It was never really clearly defined. And,
because it was supposed to be like a companion app on your phone.
Yeah. And then, of course, that's not their responsibility to determine whether or not you had to pay for that app or if its use would cost money or anything. But you definitely needed to have this remote ID unit, no specs given, just, it'll have to happen. So there was a lot of like pie in the sky, non-specific details about what it would require, even if it's just a performance-based spec. It's kind of like hey, it has to do the following, send the following stuff. It was more of a performance spec, but there was still a lot of gray area in there. So Race Day Quad basically read this and they felt like it was an impingement on their business as well as the hobby. And as a drone supplier, it was affecting their business directly because as part of this, they said, hey, once this is released, a certain amount of time from that date, which is coming up actually very soon, manufacturers need to start including this remote ID as part of their kit. They're required to include it in their manufacturing, so it's tamper-proof, and it's going to be included in every piece of kit that goes out. And then at a certain point afterwards, I think it's a year, then everybody who's a pilot of a UAV needs to comply. So they're then on the hook for having remote ID on anything over 250 grams.
And
unless, and there's a provision or two, but basically if you're not in certain special spots, you have to be transmitting your remote ID, broadcasting.
Okay. And I lost my train of thought there. Nothing after that year, at which point the pilots have to comply. There's no grandfathering in of older units that didn't have the technology.
They talked about having ones that are built in and tamper-proof. Again, that's coming from the manufacturer side. And that at a certain point, you have to at least put on a removable unit that you can then, attach to whatever UAV you have. But basically, you have to have one on your unit that flies, period. You have to comply. So it may not be built in, but it has to be like a tamper-proof unit that you add to your existing model. They don't care. They want you to basically be broadcasting where your drone is. That includes height, speed, and location information, as well as who owns it. And supposedly it should hide details about you. And we'll go into some of the details of the 4 points that were argued. But basically it also then would tell, it'd have to have a thing that told, broadcast out where you were. So where it took off from and where you as a pilot were. So it's broadcasting your location as well as the drone. So if I'm traveling, and it's, the idea is that it's a broadcast that goes out maybe a mile. You have to be pretty close to be able to pick it up. So if, you have to, so it's not like general people are going to be able to just grab your information and store it. And now and that's one of the things that they talk about later. But basically, one of the arguments was that it's not like it's just broadcast. It's not like it's actually gathered and stored anywhere, which that was one of the gripes with the network method, is that you had to log into this network, the network tracked you, and the network would save this data.
Right.
And that's thereby keeping, that's violating a couple basic rights right there.
Right. So this broadcast style instead, if say somebody was flying over the ballpark where they shouldn't be, somebody with the right equipment theoretically that should be able to do this. Law enforcement could say, "There's a
or
craft.
anybody.
It should have the radio. We're going to listen in, and we're going to find out where the pilot is.
Yeah.
So we can go talk to him.
Right.
And say you're not supposed to be flying here." Is one application.
Exactly. And right, it sounds like the kind approach is that they're trying to find bad actors and make sure that they can stop those bad actors. And if there needs to be proof, this is one way you could kind of get proof, is that, hey, we're in the area, we noted this following thing, and then we can use it later maybe. But it's only if you happen to catch it, right? So so the way the actual brief was filed, Ray State Quad outlined 4 additional arguments. There was a violation that the rule that they made violated the Fourth Amendment by permitting persistent warrantless tracking. That was one. The FAA arbitrarily.
Now this is in response to.
So after they made
updated broadcast version.
Yes. Let me see. Hold on. I think they made the NPRM, and then there was comment. No, it's after the comment period, and they made that adjustment to the broadcast RID. Then they filed their arguments, and the argument was one, that violated the Fourth Amendment by allowing somebody to persistently and warrantlessly track you, right? That's against the laws in America. The FAA arbitrarily and capriciously relied on non-public ex parte communications during the rulemaking process. So the FAA is a public entity, and their meetings and their conversations were private. And there were conversations with third parties who had vested interests in having this go through. And people were routinely kicked out of meetings. I'm a citizen. You were making rules against me. I have every right to be in this meeting. As a rulemaker, as a public rulemaker, you are required to allow me a seat at this room. And they said, nope, get out. Don't care. So that wasn't okay, but apparently, according to the appellate courts, it was. The FAA did not consult with the Radio Technical Commission for Aeronautics, which is the RTCA, or the National Institute of Standards Technology, as legally required, and there was a failure to address the significant public comments as required by the Administration Procedure Act, so the APA. So what in that just there, they're basically saying, like, you didn't follow the regulations and the rule, the technical guidance that is in other public entities, right? In the Radio Technology Commission for Aeronautics, like, they govern how you do radio stuff with aeronautics, and they weren't consulted. And the National Institute of Standards Technology. And so basically talking with the people who are ensuring that what you want is going to be consistent and comply with the requirements set forth, right? So those organizations weren't included in any of their discussions as legally required by their procedures. And one of the things that's in the list of when you make a notice for public rulemaking, there's a procedure you have to follow, and they have to address all significant public comments, and many of the comments were just ignored. I mean, how could they possibly get through? Was it 5,600 or 56,000, 53,000? What was it? I lost the number. Darn it. I said it earlier. There we go. 53,000 plus wide-ranging comments. Right? So it's like, oh, well, we couldn't possibly do it. It's like, doesn't matter. The rules set out on how you're to govern how you do things says you need to. And if there's that many comments, maybe what you did isn't right. I think that's kind of why it's set up the way it is. So those are the 4 arguments that they put forth. And in the fall, the FAA fired back. It did an Association for Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International, say AUVSI. So the FAA wasn't the only one. So this other AUVSI, which by the way has a strong vested interest in making sure that this goes through, which filed, because it allows all these, silly hobbyists to get out of the way, and allow them to just do what they want to do, which filed a friend of the court brief in support of the agency's position. The parties argued before a 3-judge panel, which is what we talked about in December. And in an interesting twist, much that was discovered or discussed revolved around the FAA's authority to govern the airspace all the way down to the lowest blade of grass, which is otherwise known as navigation rights. By far, however, the Fourth Amendment issue took up most of the airtime, because this is a basic right in America. And it's the, protections against unlawful rights for search and seizure. I could get that wrong, but I stated up earlier what it specifically covered in that case. The judges appeared to be inclined to find that the people have both property and privacy rights below the tree line, and that over their privately owned property in certain circumstances. Which seemed, when I was listening to it, to be a big nail in the coffin for the remote ID, basically requiring them all to go back and redo the whole thing and start the whole system over again. But then more than 7 months have gone by after those arguments, right? And we're now in August. I think it was issued at the end of July. And it basically said about 45 days before the rule's mandatory compliance deadline for the original equipment manufacturers. So it's all those people who have to put this RID stuff, which still hasn't been defined or identified how it's supposed to happen. The manufacturers have to put it in their stuff in 45 days. The court ruled against race day quads. So
from the date that the court ruled against race day quads, all the manufacturers had 45 days before the compliance deadline.
Right. I mean, they knew the deadline was coming up, but they weren't sure if the rule is going to be overturned or if it's going to be upheld.
So we may see a halt in product availability.
Absolutely. Or there will probably be people who will just say, I'm out. It depends. I mean, there's a lot to be said. I imagine you're going to see a lot of ad hoc, add-on remote ID units that'll be sold if you want to comply, right?
Right, but for current units that they're selling, they have to comply.
Yep.
So
they have to take all the existing models, take them apart, put this RID unit inside an existing thing. So basically all the stuff that you see now, I imagine we're going to start seeing fire sales for everything in stock. Please get it out of here because we need to replace it with stuff. If we can't retrofit it easily, you need to buy it before we have to just toss it. Or find a better way.
Keep an eye on those deals.
I know, right? But you have you have to find a way to add remote ID.
Yeah, but I got a year to do that.
Yeah, that's true. You got a good point. Or 2 or whatever. There's a calendar, and I thought it was like 3 years from the original rulemaking for the OEMs to comply, and I thought it was 2 more years for general citizens to comply. And that's the other thing, is that one of the requirements was that if you don't have those things, you could still fly in a FAA, which is a federally regulated instituted area or something like that, where basically like you're in a spot that they say this happens and it's okay. We allow you a bubble for you to fly in. And it's a pretty menial bubble. It's like 800 feet from the spot you take off.
Are you saying the FAA is not a thing anymore?
Oh, no, it's a thing. It's still not defined, and nobody's been approved for it. But it's a thing. Part of the rulemaking identified and outlined exactly how long FRIAs were allowed. Basically, it would be you get your license to be a FRIA for a certain amount of time. I thought it was like 5 years. It wasn't indefinitely. And that at the end of 5 years, the FAA had every right to not re-up. It seemed to me very clear that they are looking to phase. If you aren't on a remote ID, then you're out of the sky. Yeah. Unless you're really light and insignificant. Okay, so let's finish this section up here because there's basically like kind of like the post review of what happened and how maybe some of the impacts that it might have, right? At least as far as this article, and I put a link to the article here, but they weren't the only one. I'm going to talk about some of the other things I've heard because Josh Bardwell, and that's his whole industry pretty much. That's his livelihood. XJet is another one who's a big proponent of, he loves quadcopters. And while he's in New Zealand, he knows most of his audience on YouTube. There's a big part of it is from here and they support him. And he's been like, he just doesn't like when government agencies overreach. He hates it in his town. He hates it in his country. He hates it anywhere really. And he's been watching this going like, this is baloney. This has to stop, and it's all because it's only going to cascade all the way around the world. Like everybody's going to be, oh, well, they did it, whoever it is that did it. It's like, oh, they did it. We're going to do it. All right. So let me finish this part up and then we'll talk a little bit about what XJet suggest as maybe alternatives going forward. And kind of what he's concerned about, maybe, if I can remember it. Anyway,
who's XJet again?
XJet, he's Bruce Simpson. He's from New Zealand. He has a YouTube channel called XJet and RC Model Reviews. He has amazing starter videos. Like if you're just getting started, you want to understand the way things work. He has a lot of great whiteboard kind of presentations, I'll call it loosely. Okay. They're really helpful in just kind of understanding what the heck is going on with your RC equipment. If you don't find ours to be enough, he's got a great series to complement it, of course.
Which you probably won't find ours to be enough.
Anyway, well, because it's a video, he can also kind of show you the pictures and the, draw it on a board, which we couldn't in the audio format. Anyway, so Race Day Quad.
We could. You guys just wouldn't see it.
Well, if we put our stuff on YouTube, we'll definitely have to include some pictures. So maybe that'll be a big reason to tune in. Race Day Quad argued that the remote ID was facially involved, so under the Fourth Amendment, because RID's persistent GPS.
If you're going to read that thing, read it right.
Facially
invalid.
Wow. What language was I reading? Because I apparently wasn't reading that one at all.
Matinese.
Boy, oh boy. Okay. Race Day Quad argued that the remote ID rule was facially invalid under the Fourth Amendment because remote ID's persistent GPS tracking qualities, which is kind of part of the drone and part of the remote ID requirements for the unit, that it was accessible by law enforcement without a warrant, which would interfere with one's reasonable expectations of privacy. And of course, the court, as you heard in the ruling at the beginning, that the court disagreed. They, I think, stated the drone system's real-time location data says nothing qualitative about the nature of the location nor the operator's relationship to it, as in whether or not they're at home, right? And part of the argument is that if you're on your own home, in your house, maybe in your own private property under the tree line, you have no right to know what I'm doing. That's my zone. That's my home. It's my private place. Mm-hmm. The government has no business there. And that was the argument against the Fourth Amendment parts there. Obviously, the court disagreed, as stated in that statement I just read. Because drones fly in the public and in the air, the court said, drone pilots generally lack any reasonable expectation of privacy in the location of the drone systems during flight. The rule, as noted, does not otherwise authorize privacy invading practices because it does the following things. It calls for installation, not monitoring by law enforcement. So it's required to install a tracking device, or the requirement to install the tracking device does not in and of itself constitute any illegal tracking.
It just opens the door for it.
Oh yeah, it makes it simple and easy. But I mean, the rule doesn't say that the tracking is going to happen. It just says you just have to make sure you can be monitored, or that the device can emit stuff that can cause you to be tracked.
But okay.
Yeah, I'm with you, but it's again, these are the finer points, and this is part of why they're talking about like, though they upheld the ruling, there are definite avenues where very case specific arguments can be made to refine maybe how it's written. Maybe I don't know. We'll talk about that in a second. It also gives only short-term access to location information. So RAD broadcast modules start and stop with the takeoff and landing, right? So the court kind of expanded on it and said that the drone's real system, the real-time location data, says nothing qualitative about the nature, which I just read, of the location nor the operator's relationship to it, and then whether or not they're home. And the rule does not authorize the aggregation or storage of flight data for later law enforcement queries. So basically, it says the rule doesn't authorize it. Not to say it won't happen, but the rule doesn't state that it's happening as part of the rule.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, there's an argument there by Bruce. He says that there are receivers all across America for gliders as part of it's like kind of like a general network that was created to make sure that gliders can have safe contact. Because, when something goes wrong in a glider, you don't have many options.
Right.
They don't have a propeller to just keep going. Most of them. Anyway, so there's a system there that can easily be modified to include pulling in the data that's transmitted by these drones. And part of that is then transmitted on the internet. And of course, that gets stored and saved for any use later. And so it's not unreasonable to expect that will be happening in the future, like near future. Right? That's one of the arguments. Why he's like, this is ridiculous. Like, this is technically saying, well, technically, it didn't do the thing that would get it in trouble. So it's okay. So we can't strike it down, I think is probably the better way to put it. It still requires law enforcement to abide by the Constitution, right? It didn't say that law-abiding, the law enforcement is exempt from any of the constitutional laws because of this rulemaking, right? The rule itself actually says this, that the court locked onto it, that nothing about the rule itself supports Brennan's assertion that it'll be used by the government in ways that violate the drone's pilot's privacy rights. So the rule doesn't say that it'll happen, so it's okay. It's very much the unsaid, right? So the clincher per the court, the kind of the nail in this coffin of why it's okay is that we, the court, do not foreclose the possibility of a declaratory judgment or injunctive action by a party establishing that the application of the remote ID rule to its own specifically delineated drone uses would subject it to an unconstitutional privacy deprivation. It says emphasis added. In other words, while the court found the rule good to go on its face, it left the door open for future case-specific challenges. And so if you're saying, well, the whole point of this drone is to be covert, it kind of defeats the entire purpose of it.
Well, what drone that a civilian would have would need to be covert?
And you're working for law enforcement? You're selling stuff to law enforcement? You have to make the drone, right? And you're required to comply by law to have the RID in it as part of, and like a tamper-proof part of your drone. But if you're making it if you're a crook and you want to know if you're getting surveilled by the police, because they're checking on you, because I guess you're trying to run from the police, you can have a scanner and you can, oh, the drone's coming, I better go. You can tell it's coming. You can tell where it is. You can tell where the police are standing. Right? So in that circumstance, as it's being used covertly for law enforcement in a method of apprehension of criminals, you might say that I can't make this drone for these guys. I need you to make a special case.
Right.
And that's the most positive spin I could think of. I haven't thought too hard on it, but I'm just saying. So it's really interesting how this is worded and how it's approved, I guess. The rule is not overturned.
Right.
And I hope that kind of cleared it up. I mean, I don't know. I hope that kind of gets you the information you need to be able to like think about it for yourself. Like I said, Bruce Simpson talked about that there's a network that's already out there that could easily be subverted to being basically recording the data locally and saving it on on a net access. And that's essentially what the glider pilots do is they log into the website that has, it's like the Aeroware or whatever it is, where they show all the flights that are going around the world,
Right.
And so you don't have to be anywhere near it. You can be across the world and see what flights are flying where. And it'll probably include unmanned drones at some point. They'll have a layer that you can see which unmanned drones are flying where, according to the broadcast data. And it'll probably include where the pilot is, wherever you want. So it's just something to be concerned with. And he said, look, and his whole thing is, so how do you fight this, right? How do you change the way things are? Is look, if it's a law and it's unjust or unreasonable, you have every right as a citizen, generally speaking, to say, I'm not complying with that. I wasn't asked about this. I wasn't told to weigh in. This was put upon me. My politicians didn't come to me and say, hey, is this going to be a problem? They just said, we want to do this. And the FAA said, okay, cool. Let's do that. There's many different ways they could have taken the directive to create a remote ID system or a method to track drones. Because that was the mandate from the courts. Or from Congress and Senate.
So you're saying because the FAA just decided to do a thing, somebody could just decide to not abide by it?
Yeah, it's like, I wasn't consulted. I'm not, this isn't, this is unjustly put upon me. I'm not okay with this. I'm exercising my right to be non-compliant. Now, you could be put in jail. You could be made an example of and put in jail or fined for ridiculous amounts. That's been done before.
Okay, so it's not that you're going to not comply without penalty.
Right, but if there's a lot of people like, I'm not doing it, and nobody does it.
You could say kick rocks, but they're going to throw those rocks back at you. Probably.
Okay. But my point is if nobody is complying with the rule, what kind of rule is it?
Yeah.
There's a lot of paper rules. Like I think in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, there's a rule that says if 2 people have 3 feet off the floor, or 3 people, it's like an orgy or something, and thereby illegal or something. Yeah, it's one of those weird like 1700s law that is on the books. Because remember, like originally it was founded by Quakers and very religiously conservative groups. Like your house is a brothel if there's more than 4 unrelated women in it. So almost every apartment building is a brothel, technically, I think.
Boy, that took a sideways route.
No, I'm just saying that there are rules like that all over, and every government, right? Where they're like these weird rules that like they don't get enforced anymore. They're silly. Nobody, half the people don't even know they're there. It's just harder to get rid of them, so you just leave them. Mm-hmm. And it could be that this rule, this thing here, becomes one of those things. And his argument is like, really, this is really more of a play for data grab. More like, how you basically, you're paying for the airway for your cell phone. This is like, well, you need to use this data. So I want that money for that service. But they're touting like, oh, we're going to have drones everywhere. It's going to be amazing. It's going to help our business. Like, it's really not economical, generally speaking, to use drones to do much of anything. You'd be better off getting a remote control car, and driving it up to people's addresses.
You think so?
Yeah. As far as cost wise and money investment and its actual use and function, it'd be generally better. Just ideas. You know what I mean? Like, is like flying a drone to somebody's house and dropping a crane to move it kind of near their place, like really not the best solution to getting a package safely to the purchaser.
Mm.
It's food for thought. But a lot of it's being touted because the side benefit is if you own that data, boy, oh boy, are you making money.
Yeah.
You know, if you own that service that allows them to do that stuff, boy, aren't you the winner. And that's probably the bigger grab.
I'll need to look into the Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International.
I know, right?
To see what that's about.
Well, I hope I didn't make it worse. I hope I didn't muddy the waters, but it sounds like basically the fight for by Race Day Quad against the FAA is over, and the rules have not changed. So all the things that we were worried about after they modified it are still in effect.
Now, very briefly, because we're kind of up against the clock at this point.
Yeah, I know we are.
When you and I were talking yesterday, or I think it was yesterday, or some point, and you were telling me you want to talk about this, you had mentioned something about how this might impact Flight Fest next year.
Well, I guess it wouldn't be next year. It'd be like, well, I was thinking more the manufacturers aren't going to be producing things that are over 250 grams.
Okay.
You know, it's going to be a lot harder to do that. Their stock is going to be limited significantly. I have to go back over and look at what about constructed models. Is Flight Test going to be required to sell remote ID units?
Yeah, include them in every one of their speed build kits, maybe.
Yeah, but you're supposed to do it where it's untamperable. If you're making the plane, how can you do that? Was it just a unit you sell and Velcro to the top?
Well, is the unit untamperable?
Right. I think that's the case. So, I mean, they could just be selling like a little pod you have to put in. I don't know. It just seems, you know, I don't know. I feel like the industry is going to go, well, how in the heck am I going to make money doing this?
Yeah.
You know, and it's going to really upset a lot of things that are working barely. Because, I mean, this industry doesn't work on a wide margin of profit. So most of the people doing this stuff here in this hobby, they're doing it because they love it, not because they're making gobs of money. I'm not saying they're not making money. I'm just saying, you know, there are some industries where you're making money hand over fist and you can't even put it away fast enough. This isn't one of those industries.
All right. Well, thanks for updating me on that anyway.
Yeah. I hope it helped other people kind of understand what's going on and where it's at. And if you disagree with it, ultimately the goal was probably to talk to all of our constituents. What is that, 5 years ago when they were thinking about making this a rule to begin with? And then, you know, just think about how you're going to do it. I'm curious to hear if you're, not that I want you to incriminate yourself and say, I'm not going to comply, but I mean, how do you think this is going to affect the hobby? I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to see an email. You can reach me at matt@aviationrcnoob.com. Matthew, sorry, at aviationrcnoob.com. You could send it to Joe at aviationrcnoob.com. You could just send it to both of us at aviationrcnoob@gmail.com. You can also go to our website and hit the contact us button and send us an email that way. I'm trying to think of what else. So you can visit us at our website and see what we're up to. You can also join us on our Discord. We're going to have a link in the description down below.
Are you working on the closing rule?
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. I figured we're going to be working on a lot of the stuff we just talked about and doing more of it. So that's.
No, you're fine. I just, as you were going on and on, I was like, I think you're trying to do the closing rule.
Well, look, you told me we were running long. Let's finish it up. Well, and we're also going to have links to if you want to build the Stuka, there'll be a couple links. But go find your own. There's more out there. That's a very popular plane to model. There's also references to the wiki article as well as another Warbird historical site that kind of goes over some other stories. And again, there's more out there. I just happen to grab a couple. There's let's see, the remote ID case briefing review came from a site, and I have it linked here. And I also have a link to Bruce Simpson's take on this, Mr. XJet. And again, I didn't do Josh Bardwell, but you can look that up. I know he talks about it weekly with his co-conspirator over there. And I'm sure it came up recently. So it's if you want to look for it, it's there. I thought that this was a pretty solid breakdown of what happened, why it happened, where it went, and what the judges said and why. So I hope that's a big help. In the meantime, get out and fly while you can.
Yeah. I gotta get out and do some flying sometime.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe we can get together one of these this weekend coming up or something. All right. In the meantime, I'm Matt.
I'm Joe.
And we'll see you later.
Oh, okay. You're just all right.
I don't know. Joe is so surprised. Look, we got our things all sideways.
Can I do my outro?
Do you want to do yours?
I like doing my outro.
It makes you feel whole inside, doesn't it?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Can I do the thing?
You can.
All right. Well, guys, as always, thank you for tuning in and listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode and this conversation as much as Matthew and I have enjoyed having it. He's already gone over all the email addresses and the Discord and the Facebook page. So thank you, Matt.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And if there's nothing else.
No, I don't have anything. How about you?
No, I'm good, man.
Good. All right, let's close it out, bud.
All right, guys. We'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye. You killing me, man. Killing me.
Look, I thought it kind of rolled through it. I thought you're just sort of like, okay, he's closing it out. All right. I'll catch the things. I'll catch the things that you miss, and and do it that way.
Yeah, but then you were just like, okay, bye. And I'm like, I didn't get to say anything.
I was hoping you would kind of jump in a little bit, but
No, you kept talking.
Well, there's a lot in that outro.
Yeah. There can be.
Yeah, there can be. Oh,
there can be. I mean, and that's why at this point it's a role for me. Like, it's just, here's what I say.
Yeah, so. I know. You were so thrown off. You're like, but I didn't say any of the things I'm supposed to say. This is not right. Like, something's wrong here.
Like,
Mayday, Mayday,
like,
Mayday.
We share the beginning of the episode. The last 15 seconds of the show is sort of mine. Has been for a very long time.
It has been. I figured. I figured we're going to be changing up the intro a little bit. We're going to maybe change how we kind of bring people in, and then maybe worthwhile to kind of adjust how we bring people out.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll figure it out.
All right. You ready to hit stop?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, hit stop. Man, it's so good to be able to see you.
I know, man. I know I'm not looking at you right now because I'm just trying to get my notes all squared up.
Yeah. Well, so when we're doing this, because I have to be up on the mic, that's a big portion of my view gone over here. Yeah. But I can still have the show notes over there. That works.
I thought about doing this where I kind of keep it low and on the inside. I don't know if this sounds better or worse.
It's all right. It's all right.
Okay. But this keeps it out of my vision so you can see all my glorious beard.
Yeah. Well, it's not just your mouth that I pull cues from.
No, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, because even there, that's still well out of the way. You can bring it up higher,
but
there tends to be some anticipation in the eyebrows or the eyes that say I'm about to jump in on you.
Oh,
All right. Let's see. I'm gonna let you you do the editing on this one, because there's plenty of B-roll material that I'm not going to worry about.
Come on now.
Yeah.
See if
But
I
for
get one
now, yeah, get my mustache hairs all out of my mouth.
Yeah, you got to trim that stuff. That's the only problem. At a certain point, you're like, okay, the stragglers that are trying to crawl inside need to go.
Normally, I do clip it right at lip level, but I want to get
You want to get the curtain.
Yeah, like I want to get a fat caterpillar up there.
Okay, Burt Reynolds.
Hey, if I want to let the beard grow out, I need a mustache with some volume to match. It's just